Knee replacements. One of the most common surgeries that you'll see in Australia or worldwide. Kind of not surprising. So remember how we talked about the knee being the Jan Brady. If you don't know who the Brady Bunch are, you're not probably ready for a knee replacement anyway. Jan Brady was the middle of the Brady sisters. The knee is normally a problem because of Marsha, who was the oldest, or Cindy, and Cindy Brady was the youngest. It cops it. It's in the middle, but no one can remember to focus on it until it's really in a lot of pain. Now, we talked about a number of different conditions, and they actually make those conditions, such as a meniscus tear, an ACL, so an anterior cruciate ligament tear, or PCL, any of those injuries can make you more vulnerable to osteoarthritis of the knee. Now, what that means is that you've worn away the meniscus. Actually, I didn't mention it to you before when we were talking about the meniscus, but I thought I might tell you now anyway. About 30 to 40 years ago, so long ago, surgeons used to take the meniscus out of the knee of football players. Brilliant, wasn't it? Because that way they weren't going to have a meniscus injury during the football season. The only problem was they ended up getting osteoarthritis in their knee in their late 30s, early 40s. So then they had to have a knee replacement. But that was okay, they weren't playing football then, so it wasn't a problem. But now they've realised that they don't do that, which is a bit of a relief. But unless you're dealing with an old footballer, you generally will see some form of meniscus in the knee, often a damaged one. But when they've had that, you end up seeing those meniscus going away, and people end up just having that tibial plateau. Remember that tourist joint we were talking about? Well, it gets eroded because the femur on top is wearing that away from walking and constant pressure. So what happens is you've got to get a new knee replaced. Surgeons, they're special. As carpenters, what they do is they come, wear off, they get their special saw, but they go, and off that comes. And then out comes this new metal plate, and then that gets glued on, and then they create a little stick, and that replaces your ACL, PCL structures. They do all of this in surgery, and the person will be in the bed, waking up, and they'll have their knee in this machine, pushing their leg in and out. Because what they're wanting to do is get mobility in that knee as quickly as possible. And whilst you're in a hospital, you're going to be pumped up on some pretty heavy medications. And they want you on those medications because this is going to be very, very painful to move on this knee in these early stages. This is when I say, let the physios deal with it. They can deal with that in the hospital. And I personally saw this with my mother. My mother is special, love her dearly, but she's had 2 knee replacements. Her first knee replacement was in the late 90s. And really there wasn't that much good quality rehab on that knee. It was rest up, dear. Have a cup of tea. And 2 years later in hydrotherapy, she still couldn't really bend that knee. Got hold of her and put her through a bit of Pilates, and she managed to get more range of movement in that knee than she'd had for years. She realised why I kind of liked Pilates at that time. Mid-90s, that was then, and then around 2006, 2007, my mother had a second knee replacement. This time, she was not coming home until she had spent 2 weeks in the rehab ward, and she wasn't even going into surgery until I had had her in the studio every day for 6 months prior. Okay, I appreciate that many clients can't afford to come and see them. I wasn't charging my mother. But she was not going to do very well if she didn't do the prehab strengthening. So we did a whole heap of work, and we're going to go through this when we do the demonstrations and repertoire of the exercise. She strengthened. She got her knee and her quad stable. Then she went into surgery. This time she woke up and she had that machine in, out, a lot of medication. And she was in the special rehab unit for 2 weeks, doing a lot of work on getting her stronger and more stable. Once she was out of hospital, she wasn't allowed to drive for 6 weeks because she didn't have proper knee range and she was on a fair few painkillers. You really don't want them driving. Once again, my mother was lucky. I set up a Pilates studio in her home, and I had one of my teachers go to her home every day for 6 weeks. I personally did not try and do this because it could have ended up in death. But I did one day say, I'll come and visit my mum with one of my teachers. And as the teacher was driving in, I heard my mum, "Hi, Catherine, I've just got the lasagna in the oven." And I went, "Oh." And I realised that my mother yes, she was doing her Pilates and she was doing her work every day for the 8 weeks, but my teachers were putting on so much weight. She was cooking them lasagna and ravioli. She was happy as she's a feeder. But it was a motivation and it kept her moving. So once again, remember with your clients, you do need to get them working. And ultimately the goal for knee replacements is being able to get to 90 degrees. Now the 90 degrees of the knee, the doctors were gobsmacked when they saw how well my mother did at 90-degree range. Again, it took a little bit of effort on our behalf, but there's all of these online facilities now that people are discovering that you can do online classes with your clients at home. So if they can't drive into the studio, you can do a lot of work with them.